So it's 5:05, so I think we have to start now. So first of all, thanks to all of you for having come to this session. This panel is on experiences in Asia Pacific. First of all, the first thing I have to say is that I have to apologize Professor Keiko Okawa, who was supposed to be here in this panel, but she cannot make it. Unfortunately, she got up very sick this morning, and although she's in Madrid, she could not be able to come to this panel. So I have to say I have to apologize on behalf of Professor Keiko Okawa. Another important thing is that Emoocs is supposed to be a European conference, so it's a European MOOC Stakeholder Summit. However, we have people from all over the world through the years. So there are not only European people here, but we have a number of people from North America, also from Latin America. And it's good to say that next Friday we will have a session for those of you who speak Spanish that will be focused on the Latin America world and how they are doing with MOOCs. And we wanted to also have the opportunity to see what's going on the other side of the world, in this case in Asia Pacific. So it's sometimes easy for those Europeans attending this conference to see what's going on in Europe, but sometimes we don't know what challenges have in Asia Pacific when trying to deploy MOOC initiatives. So we are going to have 3 great panelists today. So I would like to thank them all. So Professor T.C. Pong from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Professor Armin Weinberger from Saarland University in Germany, and also Professor Irfan Naufal Umar from Universiti Sains Malaysia in Malaysia. So for this panel, we're going to have 3 short presentations for panelists, and then we will have time for questions. So I'm asking you to collect all the questions you may have until the end of the session, until the end of the presentations, and then we will have this round of discussion with our panelists. So I encourage people who are on the door, please come in, please help us fill this room. Okay, so we're going to start with the first presenter, the first panelist, Professor T.C. Pong, Ting Chue Pong, who is a senior advisor to the Executive Vice President and Provost, Director of the Center for Engineering Education Innovation, and Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. He joined this university, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, as a founding faculty member in 1991. Before joining the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, he was an associate professor of computer science at the University of Minnesota. He's currently leading the effort in the development of MOOCs and blended learning courses at his university, and his MOOC on Java programming was recognized as one of the 10 most popular EDX courses in the last year, in 2016. And I have to say that it was a source of inspiration for some of us who are also doing MOOCs, particularly in Java, here at this university, so we could explore the work he did at his university and get some of these brilliant ideas. So thank you very much for coming to Madrid from such a long distance and staying here with us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Carlos, for the very nice introduction. Thanks. Well, let me first tell you a little bit about the university where I'm from, the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. This is our campus. I must say that it's a very beautiful campus. You're all welcome to visit us. It's overlooking a Clearwater Bay. The university is actually quite young. We are only 25 years old. And you can see that we are actually still celebrating our 25th anniversary. You can see from this picture that is a screenshot of a Coursera page for our university. HKUST joined Coursera in 2012 as the first partner from Asia. And we actually started to offer MOOC in 2013. And you can see that we have a pretty good collection of courses in different areas. Although we are a science and technology university, we want to present an image that we don't just offer science and technology courses. In fact, the first batch of courses in Chinese history, in gastronomy, which is the science of cooking. And then we also joined ethics in 2013. You can see that these are some of the courses on ethics. We offer more science and technology courses, including my course, Introduction to Java Programming. We also offer some English courses. Now, 2 years ago, we started to offer specialization. As you know, specialization is a series of related MOOCs, and we are actually quite successful. The specialization here is on full-stack web development, which has attracted over 300,000 students. But what is even more interesting is that although from the time we started to offer MOOC, we had no idea about whether we could generate any revenue. It turns out that the specialization here generated quite significant revenue for us. That actually created some problem because we didn't have the policy for distributing the revenue collected. So just recently, we tried to establish the policy for doing that. So far, we have offered 20-some MOOCs with a total of over 1 million registered users among these MOOCs. Well, we are quite small. So the university itself has just around 10,000 students, including undergraduate as well as postgraduate students. So that means our faculty size is also very small, and it's difficult for us to offer too many MOOCs. Another reason is that we are a publicly funded university. Although teaching the world is a noble mission, but we still have to address the issue why we are using taxpayer money not to benefit our students. So we make it very clear from the very beginning, our objective is to use MOOC to also try to benefit our students. So we put a lot of emphasis in doing learning analytics. So we try to use learning analytics to understand how students learn so that we could improve the delivery of teaching and learning, not only online, but also on campus. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. So as Carlos mentioned earlier, we are lucky that one of our courses listed as one of the top 10 most popular courses in 2016 on ethics. And our specialization has also done quite well. It's listed as one of the top 10 computer science specialization by Coursera in 2016. Now, as I mentioned, we focus a lot on the learning analytics, and we developed a tool called Wishbook for visualizing the study pattern of students. I just want to give you some idea by playing a short video. Can you also make sure that
Wishbook is a learning analytic tool for visualizing the data collected from MOOC platforms. A lecture video can be selected for carrying out the analysis. You'll find 3 graphs under the video. A graph at the bottom of the window represents the different mouse events, namely play, pause, seek, rate change, start, and error. This is called a stack graph. One can move the cursor along the graph to find out the frequency of different mouse events entered by the users. Since seeks can go forward or backward, they are further represented in 2 separate graphs. The orange strips here shows the forward seek event. Each line in the graph represents the starting and ending position of a forward seek. The blue strip below it shows the backward seek events. The backward seek events are of particular interest. Let's switch to another lecture video. This lecture compares the education systems between China and the West. One can easily see that there's an obvious peak here in the stack graph. One can click here to find out the corresponding location in the video. The topic being discussed here is about income distribution of students in the US. By selecting demographic information, one can look at the activities of students from different countries. Let's take a look at students from the United States. It's clear that the...
Oh, sorry. Pushed the wrong button. But I just want to show you that it's not going. Well, if you look at the step graph, you can look at how different group of students are watching the video. Earlier on, you can see that students from the United States pay a lot of attention to a particular segment of the video because it's about the United States. So if you pick another country like China, you'll find that the peak disappear, right? And what is interesting is that if you go further on to look at the peak for students in China, you can then guess that the information, the material being covered there is about China. All right. So another analysis that we have done is on the social interaction. By looking at the discussion forum, we create a visualization on how students interact among the different groups. For example, we found that there's a tendency for the high-performance students to interact with also students who are also performing well. So I'll just skip this part here.
Which book is it?
Okay, so here.
Another feature offered by this analytic tool is for the discussion forum. By clicking on social network under forum, we can visualize how students interact with each other through their discussion postings. Each student is represented in the network by two attributes. The first is his performance in the course, which is color-coded in red if the student performs well, or green otherwise. The second is on how active is the student. An active student is represented by a larger circle, while an inactive student by a smaller one. We can look at the interactivities of individual students by moving the mouse around. For example, this is a very active student who also performed well, as indicated by the size of the circle and the red color. You can see that he or she interacted mostly with other high-performing students, as indicated by the red color. Let's look at another student who didn't perform as well, as indicated by the green color. Interestingly, he or she interacted mostly with students who also didn't do too well. Perhaps the instructor could step in to provide some help.
So we want to analyze the study pattern of a diverse group of students, and then try to use the information to enhance the delivery of teaching and learning on campus. And I'll just skip this part here because I know that I'm running out of time. Well, I want also to point out that since we are talking about the MOOC activities in Asia, you know that in the US, the two prominent platforms are Coursera and edX, and you probably recognize some of the platforms in Europe. In Asia, actually, there are many different platforms being launched in the past few years, including 3 different platforms in China. This one, the Jiweishu, which means wisdom tree, is particularly successful. In the past 2 years, it attracted over 10 million users. And over 1 million of them are paid users because they're using the platform actually to offer courses that are for credits. And JMOOC is the platform for Japan, KMOOC, Korean MOOC for Korea. And in Hong Kong, we recently launched our own platform. The reason, so this is the link to the platform. The reason why we want to launch this local platform is because we have many other very good local institutions, but in order for them to offer the courses on the MOOC platform, they have to join either Coursera and edX, which they're more selective. So we decided to create this platform so that instructors from the local institution could also set up the platform. And this is the last slide that I want to show. We also hold a lot of collaboration forums for institutions within Asia. For example, here is an event just held last week, and we have a representative from, of course, Hong Kong, mainland China, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, and Japan. So this is all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, TC Pong. As I said at the beginning, we ask you to collect your questions until the end of the 3 presentations. And I would like to go with our second presenter, Professor Armin Weinberger from Saarland University. He is head and founding professor of the Department of Educational Technology and Knowledge Management at Saarland University. He has a 20-year experience in designing technology-enhanced and online learning. His major research contributions are a framework to understand and analyze argumentative knowledge construction and the development and investigation of computer-supported collaboration scripts. Professor Weinberger has advanced methods to analyze verbal data, as well as knowledge convergence and divergence in online discourse. His cross-cultural studies have identified differences in technology acceptance and online discourse of learners across cultures. So thank you very much for being here today with us.
Well, thank you very much, Carlos, for the friendly introduction. I'm going to talk about one idea of any kind of educational technology, really, and in particular MOOCs. That is that you have one package that you could redistribute all across the world. And that's, of course, a very powerful idea, but I would like to problematize that and discuss about what happens when MOOCs meet culture. So I'm obviously, Saarland University is located in Germany, not in the Asian Pacific region, but I am involved in a project which is called Competency. So Competen and C stands for Southeast Asia, and we have several members of this Erasmus Plus project here on board, on stage. Carlos is one of them, of course, Irfan, and there are some in the back, Dennis and Irfan. So yes, right. So what is, let's say, problematizing this idea of distributing this one educational approach across the world? One is certainly a hard factor, the technical infrastructure within the different cultures, which is often referred to as digital gap or digital divide. The other things are cultural standards that are different, that might afford different educational approaches as well. So let's take a look at the first one. You know this, right? This is the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and starting from these basic needs for survival and such, and safety, and then in the end it's self-actualization. And you may have seen this, people saying, okay, what we actually need is Wi-Fi as a basic requirement. This is what my children are doing when we're going to a hotel, saying, do they have Wi-Fi? And after that it's food. Yeah, food is also important. So this is of course a joke, an internet meme that I've taken off the internet, but it's a very real question for MOOCs, for the technical infrastructure, and you can add, oh my God, that's not exactly the font I was choosing, but you can add other things, and if you would read perfect Internetish, then you could read that. No, that's a joke. That's of course other things that are even more basic, like device infrastructure, like internet, like electricity, really. Yeah, we don't hear about these let's say, hurdles so much, because we see that in MOOCs people participate even from North Korea, but we understand that the people who are participating could then be counting as the academic elite that have access, but there is big disparity in different countries where these technical issues are actually a problem. And that, of course, then could constrain the educational and the technical system that you deploy. If you do not have these electricity devices, internet, bandwidth, then this is what you can do. You can print out the learning material, and oops, we're back 40 years ago in this kind of distance learning where everything has been printed out and sent. But even if you do have some level of technological infrastructure, you would have to consider, can we actually do videos? Is there enough bandwidth? And that is very often not the case. So obviously the technical side of things needs to be respected, otherwise you just don't reach out to the people you may want to reach in addition to the elite. So that's one thing, and that might be bad news to some extent. But having said that, of course, there is a notion that we were talking this morning about exponential growth, and indeed, this is very true for the technological infrastructure, and we all know how mobile devices play a major role in the economic development also of several countries in the entire continent of Africa, also in India, also in the rest of Asia. So this is, let's say, moving ahead. Let's say it's advancing. At some point, we all have the technical infrastructure. That's not a question anymore. So let's say we're designing for the future, so we don't need to wonder so much about, well, will they have mobile phones or bandwidth and so on? At some point, that will be the case. Okay, all right. So is there anything else that could maybe afford different educational approaches? Are there cultural differences that might factor in? Is one learning setting perceived the same in one country as it is in another? So that is a valid question, I believe. There has been research on cultural differences. One very famous one, which is already rather old, by Hofstede, is this idea of cultural standards that are different across the world. This is just two of the cultural standards. One is individualism, another is power distance. Individualism is, of course, this idea of to what extent the individual has, how important it is that the individual is self-actualizing and kind of realizing his or her desires. Whereas collectivism, which would be on the other side of the spectrum, is more how important is the group? Do I orientate myself towards group norms, or do I rather care about my own desires? So that's one very, very important dimension of how to differentiate different cultures. And you can see how different cultures are lined out here. You can maybe identify some. I have already identified a couple, like Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, because these are the countries we are working with here. I'm from Germany, so I laid out this. And you can see how this is spread out, how the USA, for instance, is extremely, or the most individualistic country in this respect, and how many other European countries cluster rather on the more individualistic side of things. Hong Kong is there as well. Let's see, find it. I guess that, yeah. Right. Another dimension is power distance, which is the extent to which it's accepted that there are hierarchies, whether we say, yeah, of course, it's a given that people have different amounts of power, or whether that is not the case. So, and this aligns up as well. Likewise, and this is of course important. You may say these are just first takes, and there are other cultural standards. I'm not going into that for lack of time, but we could revisit that, of course. But that is just very general dimensions about how to understand different cultures. You would also include how an educational culture differs from country to country. That's also important. To what extent you would expect as a student that the expert teacher is providing you with the one correct answer or not. Whether there is some level of debate, whether you would understand knowledge as something that is fixed and true forever and ever, or whether knowledge is evolving. So your epistemology is basically about what you believe is right or wrong. Right. We did a little study now with regard to one question, namely how online learning is perceived, and later on I will show how online learners behave. And you will see differences. Now, I have one example that is not relating to the Asian region. Unfortunately, we have done a study with a comparison, culture comparison of Germany and Romanian people. Romania, as we have seen today, of the European, the EC representative, has the least or is least developed in terms of technological infrastructure. So that's interesting. And what you can see here is that the Romanians would emphasize the social context and the social the social surround that is scaffolding online learning. So it's important what others are doing and how others can be, let's say, sought out for to receive help and such. What else? Germans believe that they are kind of computer literate, whereas Romanians are very skeptical about their computer skills, not rightfully so, I'd have to say. This is just subjective, what people think. There's no reason to believe that is actually the case, but it's about perceptions, not about reality. Overall, I make it a little bit, I make it brief. There is a notion of expectancies of Romanians that are very different from Germans. Germans are kind of like skeptical almost about new technology and online learning bringing anything new or really making a big splash or changing any practice in a positive way, whereas Romanians would rather be positive about this and regard it as avant-garde and futuristic and something that is positive and something that we should seek out. We did this study also with Egyptian population and also with the Uzbekistan population, and the pattern is very similar. So there is a very different outset of what is connected or associated with online learning or educational technology, which is very interesting. Yeah. So there is a kind of a positive vibe, so to speak, in many other countries than in at least in comparison to Germany. Now, this is one thing, how people perceive this. The other thing is how people act. Again, a European-only comparison just to make the point that there are differences between cultures. Now, in this online learning setting, we have compared German and Finnish students in culturally homogeneous groups, so Germans working with Germans, Finnish people working with Finnish people. And the task here was to discuss critically a topic, a task, yeah? Put multiple perspectives on the table, argue with each other, in a hopefully productive way, right? And what we found was that if we set out the task like so, we found a significant and substantial difference between the German and the Finnish culture in terms of how critically they were discussing these things. Yeah? Amazingly critically, the Germans, and not so much the Finnish. Yeah? It was more consensus-oriented in terms of more of an integration consensus orientation, whereas the consensus was built rather critically and conflict-oriented with the Germans. Now we gave them specific instructions in forms of a cooperation scripts telling them explicitly be critical, point out the problems of the arguments of your peer and such. And we found that that the conflict orientation of the Germans went through the roof. Yeah? They were like feeling entitled to be critical. So don't ever give that to a German. No, it's, it's not exactly true. Because in that context, it was actually the processes we wanted to see and which are related to individual learning. So it's not a bad thing in this context. And we also found the effect of this explicit collaboration script with the Finnish students very significant and substantial. However, you could see that they hardly came to the level of the baseline German group. Yeah? So this is a stark difference if it comes to this kind of behaviors that are very sensitive to culture on one hand and instructional guidance on the other. So that's very interesting to see, and we need to have more systematic research about how learning behavior differs in the respective regions and cultures. Right. So how does MOOC pedagogy respond to that? There is, of course, this notion, I'm not explaining it, CMOOC and XMOOC, which is more traditional, but the prevalent model, and of course the CMOOC, which is very, very, let's say, open and oriented towards community building. Now, how culture sensitive are these pedagogies? There are problems in each of these approaches, I would say. I'm trying to be brief. I don't know how much time I have left. Say 5 minutes. Okay, good. So there is the notion of XMOOCs being disenfranchising being a traditional approach, affirming inequalities. If you're a good learner, you can deal well, you can deal with everything. But if you're not, you're kind of lacking the support system that you need because you're alone in front of your computer. The social support that especially several other more collectivistic cultures would prefer is lacking there. So there are a couple of problems there, which are, let's say, addressed in the very open CMOOC. But, and this is interesting, if you think about this open approach of saying, let's put resources together, each one of you individually collecting resources off the internet and argue about them. This is for the academic elite. This is a learning activity which affords even more learning prerequisites and self-control and self-regulation and academic understanding and such. So for disadvantaged groups, who may have not so much access to education otherwise, this traditional approach is actually more effective. So this is a bit of a paradox and a real problems that these CMOOCs are a very complex and challenging setting for learning. So as has been discussed this day several times, what could be like a compromise is these socially safe, psychologically safe, social, collaborative learning environments, but in a structured way that provide additional scaffolds to tell people what to do and not just saying, here it is, you can do whatever you want or collect your resources yourself, but rather, let's say, narrowing down and scaffolding what is to be done in these environments. And yeah, Stian Hockleff was talking today, and I think, and he was his thesis last year, which is along these lines. Right. So what are criteria for culture-sensitive MOOC pedagogy? Of course, it's access to concise expert knowledge. This is the beef of the story, and you would want to have that, but you would also design for specific learner activities for agency and self-efficacy, scaffold exactly these learning environments in a social learning scenario and provide respective feedback. Now, that's my last slide, I guess. So I'm saying that MOOCs can accommodate learning across cultures. It's important, I think, to regard this, to be aware of the cultural differences that may not go away so easily and maybe also shouldn't, if you want, and argue for a third model between C and X, a model that is, in a sense, culture sensitive, and I believe the SMOOC or SMOOC model would be catering for that. More importantly, I think, if those of you who really paid lots of attention, you saw in the two examples that I gave of the studies I did, you saw who did them. It was within our groups and such, but it was always with researchers from the respective regions. So the Romanian study was done with Romanian researchers, the Finnish study was done with Finnish researchers. And I think that's a very important take on things, or a thing to consider, to co-design. This is an interesting way to go, I believe, in these times to find effective ways of co-designing. And this is also what the competency project is about. And we're now in a stage of trying to identify the cultural and technical prerequisites, which I believe will be presented in a minute. So I'm obliged to show you this because it's the project. So thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Weinberger, for pointing out these cultural differences between countries, to see how some of them are more individualistic, what is the distance to power, and how MOOCs can accommodate to these different cultures that we have, no? And how different sometimes are European countries that compared to Southeastern Asian countries, which were in that slide you presented were on the top right corner, no? In that slide. So Now we're going with our third presenter. So Dr. Irfan Naufal Umar is a professor at the Center for Instructional Technology and Multimedia at the University Sains, Malaysia, USM. He received his Doctor of Education on Instructional Design and Technology from the University of Pittsburgh in the US in 1999. His research is mainly on the application and impact of ICT, multimedia, e-learning on teaching, learning, and training. And of late, his studies are mainly on the use and impact of learning management systems, LMS, and mobile learning applications on learners' performance, acceptance, and satisfaction. Dr. Umar is also one of the university's trainers in e-learning and has conducted various trainings on multimedia, LMS, e-learning, instructional design for faculty members, students, school teachers, and others. So thank you very much for being here, having traveled so far from Malaysia to be here this week in Madrid. So welcome.
Thank you, Carlos. All right, so I guess I'll be the last presenter for today's session. Right, I have two sections actually for the presentation. I hope I can finish on time. The first one is actually Malaysia MOOCs, our own experience. I'm going to talk about the background of it, the policy, the current initiative, and also guideline. And the second part, perhaps I will discuss about our Erasmus Plus project, that competency that has been mentioned by Armin and Carlos just now. All right, so basically, I do not want to talk about this introduction. So in Malaysia, for those who have been in Malaysia, I know where it is. Okay, when we talk about MOOCs, we need to talk about internet penetration. Yeah? So in Malaysia, we have, there's about 77% of the population are internet users. Okay, and then we are ranked third in South Asia in terms of internet users. Okay, behind Brunei and Singapore. Interestingly, Brunei is the highest right now. All right, and then almost 78% of the households are using broadband. And then, of course, smartphone is the most popular device. And then majority of them access internet through mobile phones. And of course, majority have visited and used social media sites. But in terms of online access, there is a disparity between age groups. Of course, the one with highest percentage of being online is those between 15 to 24 years old, all right? Followed by 25 to 34 years old, and 6 to 14 years old, okay? Primary school students and junior school students, and then 35 to 44, and 45, 54 lastly is above 55 years old. That's the least group to access online. And of course, in terms of disparity between rural and urban, it's still very obvious because more than 60% of the internet users are from the urban areas, whereas only the rest are only from rural areas. So we need to look into these aspects before we jump into this MOOC initiative. So now I'm going to talk a bit about the policies of e-learning in Malaysia, and before going to this MOOC thing. Our country actually, our vision is actually to become a developed nation in 2020, which is 3 years from now. All right, we are still a developing country. So our Ministry of Higher Education, actually really tries very hard to develop the human capital. So one of their critical agenda is actually through e-learning. Yeah. All right. So they have introduced this e-learning policy, national e-learning policy, or we call it DEPAN, Dasar Pembelajaran Negara in our language, in 2011. So this is a guideline for all higher education institutions in e-learning. Okay. So the main focus is for these universities to use ICT as the enabler for teaching and learning. So in this policy, they have introduced 5 pillars. Okay, the infrastructure, the organizational structure, the curriculum, the content, the professional development, and the acculturation. And then, because this is the first version which is introduced in 2011, so we are not using Mooc yet, but at that point of time, LMS is very popular, okay? That's why they introduced this LMS. Okay, and then it has 3 stages, 3 phases in this policy. Initial phase, enable phase, and optimized phase. And then in 2015, they have introduced the second version due to this Mooc thingy that has become more and more popular and important. So in this second version, the National E-Learning Policy, they have introduced the need to have all this OCW, OER, and also Mooc. And they also started to talk about the use of this online learning and Mooc for lifelong learning. So unlike the first one that has 5 pillars, now they have 6 domains or 6 pillars. Basically, they added, let's say, governance, the online pedagogy. So very detailed and specific domains. For instance, here in this, the first domain of infrastructure and infrastructure, they have every institution, higher learning institution, needs to have its own. They need to use e-learning 2.0, and they need to have Mooc ready. That is in the last 2 years. And then starting this year, each university has to use e-learning 2.0, Mooc and mobile ready, and by 2020, sorry, missing there. So they would like to have all these universities to use learning analytics in addition to what they are required. In terms of governance, for instance, one of the focus area is they need to have e-learning unit in each university and fully operationalized. And then in 2017, this year, they should collaborate in the regional level. And then in 2020, they should be able to collaborate at the international level. Open courses, okay, this is interesting because in this policy, in this online pedagogy, the third domain, now the ministry has requested each university to have at least 3 Mooc courses in each academic year. That one is for the last 2 years. Starting this year, Malaysia, the country, requires at least 5 Mooc courses from each university. All right, and in 2020, at least 15 Mooc courses. Now there are so many. There are universities that are very active actually, producing their own Mooc. And then of course they're developing e-content and stuff. Okay, and then in terms of practice, the government also wants to have the staff, academic staff, practice blended learning, and 1% of the academic staff to conduct research and development in e-learning. In 2017 to 2019, for instance, 5% of staff conduct R&D in e-learning itself, and will be extended to 10%. So this is the policy. And then this is how the acculturation. I'm not going to discuss about that. Basically, from the user become contributor and becomes innovator. Okay, and then the second one is the initiative. Yeah? This initiative actually based on the Malaysian Education Blueprint for Higher Education in 2015. So 10 shifts have been identified. And one of this, there are 10 shifts. One of these is globalized online learning. The whole idea of this shift actually to help spur academic excellence in higher education. Okay, because we are talking about ranking all this while, so they want to push for a higher level. So in this globalized online learning, it specifically mentioned the need to have online learning, including Mooc. All right. So I'm not going to talk about this. Okay, so Malaysia Moocs have been introduced. We partnership with Open Learning, Sydney, Australia, to launch this Malaysia Moocs initiative. All right, so you can access that one from openlearning.com/Malaysia Moocs. So actually, the first university that uses Mooc in Malaysia is a private university. It's Taylor's University that introduced its first Mooc in 2013. And then in October 2014, the Ministry of Higher Education has declared Malaysia as the first country in the world to implement Moocs for all public universities. We have 20 public universities, and all these 20 public universities have to use Mooc, have to design and develop Mooc. So it's basically top-down from the ministry, okay, rather than individual university. So those are the MOOCs for each university, UNIMED MOOC, UTM MOOC, UNIMAS MOOC, USM MOOC, where I came from here. So basically they have their own MOOC. Okay, and then, interestingly, okay, they have to design and develop the MOOC, and the ministry proposed or recommended that these MOOCs, the universities have to come up with a MOOC for general courses, for niche courses, and also for lifelong learning courses. So what we mean by that is some courses offered in public universities, actually common core courses to be offered throughout the whole country. So every undergraduate student has to sit these courses. So these are the common courses. There are 4 common courses. And then each university also has its own niche area. So the ministry also would like these universities to create, design, develop their own MOOC courses in their own niche area. Okay? And then lifelong learning courses. These are relatively new, I would say. So at the moment, as of April last month, we have 200 courses, 200 MOOC courses designed and developed by these universities. And number of students, you can see that 256,000. Okay? Mind you, because some of these courses have very high number of students, because these are the common compulsory courses for undergraduate. That's why some of the courses there are 40, 50, 60,000 students registered. Okay? So the most active university is actually National University of Malaysia here, 52. Ours is only 6 courses at the moment. We are adding another 5 or 6 this year. All right? And these are all 20 universities. All right. But other private universities also have their own initiative. For instance, Taylor's University, as mentioned, now they have 30 courses. Open University, they use 2 platforms, Open Learning and so iTunes. And then other 2 universities also have their own MOOC courses. So the next thing I would like to talk about is the Mooc Guideline. The ministry, because it's top-down, they also have their own committee, and they suggest how and what the MOOC courses should look like. All right? So they provide a guideline. For instance, what are the course components, the course development, how they develop the course, how to deliver, and how about credit transfer. So these are the guidelines given by the ministry. So for instance, in the course component, they need to have landing page design, logo must be the same, the content page should be same, because they want to make sure everything looks similar, the well-structured MOOC. Okay? In terms of course development, it has to go through the committee. Instructional design needs to be adhered to, follow certain development stages, constructive alignment between learning objective and outcome, activities, assessment. So they have a very strict guideline there. Okay? And then if they use video, how to produce that, what types of assessment, these are all very clearly listed in the course guideline, in the MOOC guideline. To ensure quality, each university has to have its own QA unit. Okay? And also for the national level, because sometimes students want to transfer credit, so they have to go through, these courses have to go through this QA. The Malaysian National Qualification Agency will look at that, okay, in order to be to consider that MOOC course can be used for transfer credit. So these are the suggestions for delivery. So this credit transfer, I'm not going to talk about that later. Okay, and then adoption status, because it's relatively new in Malaysia. So the main study, nationwide studies, has been carried out about 2 years ago. But basically, this nationwide study, they found that students accept the MOOC. Firstly, because they are so used to LMS. Okay, we use LMS a lot. So in terms of activities, assessment, they have no problem with that. Blended learning also no problem. Okay, but somehow some interesting findings. For instance, students only access MOOC only once a week in hostel because there's Wi-Fi connection. If they are staying in their home house, probably they have Wi-Fi or broadband. Okay, but they accept MOOC. But then the lecturers are competent because because LMS is compulsory for us. And then the lecturers' evaluation are considerably high, but somehow some of them are still quite skeptical in using MOOC. Okay. because MOOCs is relatively new. Okay, and then they also agree that MOOC enhance their teaching learning. Yeah. Okay, that's the first part. The second part, what I'm going to discuss is we are working on a competency project. Okay, sorry. Okay, for Malaysia, we are talking about MOOCs for single mothers. Yeah, we are going to develop MOOC for single mothers in Malaysia. So we have done some feasibility study. I just want to show you some of the findings. We have several methods. We conducted survey to about 100 single mothers, and then we interviewed them. We also interviewed some stakeholders. Okay, so basically we investigated their readiness, how ready these single mothers are in terms of ICT, in terms of MOOC, and also in terms of entrepreneurial skills, because the MOOC that we are going to develop is about entrepreneurial skills, and also a bit about social media, ICT, and stuff. Okay, so basically what we found, because these are from association, yeah, Single Mothers Association. They are members of that association. So and most of them, unfortunately, they do not have degree. Or the most is diploma or O-level, okay, O-level. And then because they don't have degree, they are not non-professionals. And the income is very low, less than 460 USD per month, majority of them. Okay, but because they participate in this association because they want to be in the network and they want to do some kind of business. That's one of the main reasons, yeah, for them to participate. They use a smartphone and handphone. They hardly use tablet. They have access to smartphone a lot, no problem. In terms of internet access, more than about 65%, no problem. They access from home, and some of them have their own office. They work in office. Frequency of access, majority of them access every day, no problem. But in terms of computer skill, majority of them admitted that they have no skill. Okay, some of them have low skill or moderate skill. They use, majority of use, they know how to use internet browser and search engine. But half of them do not have email account. That's the challenge, actually. This is feasibility study, okay? And then majority of them use internet to search for information, very low for learning purposes, okay? And then, of course, majority of them say that they have their own family members, their kids, for instance, to access internet if they have problem. They have problem if using office PC or tablet. They do not have problem using smartphone, okay? In terms of readiness, they are very ready if they use smartphone, but not if using other devices. Of course, they agree that they want to learn MOOC or free online courses using MOOC, because we do ask them about this MOOC. In terms of preferred, whether blended or fully online, majority of them are not really sure. Some of them say, yes, we want fully online, but some of them say, we want blended learning. In terms of challenges, the two main challenges for them to participate in MOOC or social media, MOOC, is a lack of skills in using technology and also time constraint. Okay, so then we ask them about entrepreneurship skills. So they know the skills, yeah, the important skills in doing business or entrepreneur or to become entrepreneur. Reasons basically why they want to participate or join in entrepreneurship, actually to support their family or as a main income, because now most of them, because they are single mothers, now they are sole breadwinners for the family. Okay. Of course, they say these skills are very, very important. Okay, and then we interviewed the stakeholders. Basically, the stakeholders mentioned that they are motivated. They prefer to have face-to-face interaction. Okay, because they want to have this network. Because these are single mothers, they want to be in a group so that not only they can share their problems, but also to learn from each other. They definitely want to have collaborate with others. Okay, the last thing is we also interview practitioner, MOOC practitioner, implementer, and also he's also, this particular person also this one of the key players in MOOC Malaysia. MOOC. So some of the issue actually, students, learners, they need to see the importance of the topic. That's very important, okay? And then challenges is, first of all, lack of awareness. That's why not really that popular yet. Lack of support from top management. Copyright issues. Some lecturers actually say that they do not want to share their materials to the whole world. Okay? And then high attrition rate, that's common. And then recognition and reward. Lecturers do not still ask for that recognition reward. They want to be recognized. And the other issue is actually quality of the design. Currently, our Malaysian MOOCs still using, applying Xmoocs, really traditional way of presenting content. So we have to look into that. Okay? So these are some of the ways to improve. In university level, the MOOC manager needs to be there, promotion needs to be there, specially dedicated team, and to relook the design quality. Accreditation also still very new in Malaysia. So basically, in conclusion, just now, Malaysia is a bit late. We've started this a bit late, but we are going, as the other countries are doing. But ours is purely top-down approach. This is for the public universities. Okay, thank you very much, Carlos.
Okay, so maybe just to recap a little bit on all this information. And one thing we have seen that in this case the Malaysian government has promoted the use of MOOCs in a top-down approach, as Professor Umar said before. I think this is something we are missing in some countries in Europe and in other parts of the world. No? The promotion from the government of MOOC initiatives. And some governments don't know still what MOOCs are. Another important thing we have seen is that in Asia Pacific there are a number of platforms. In this case, we have seen Malaysian MOOC as an initiative that started with a private university, but that public universities, all the public universities joined. And Professor Pong has presented some other platforms that are around the area, particularly in China mainland, Shuetang X, in Hong Kong, HK MOOC, JMOOC in Japan, K MOOC in Korea. We know about Indonesia X in Indonesia, so there are a number of platforms. And finally, the project competency has been mentioned here. So this is a project funded by the EU, which will focus on Southeast Asia in this case, and in 3 countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, with 3 target learners for the MOOCs that are being created. So one of them are single mothers with children, in the case of Malaysia. The second one are rural health workers, in the case of the Philippines, particularly midwives. And the third one in Indonesia are small companies in isolated regions. These are 3 very, very specific target learners in the area. So I think now it's time to give you the floor and start with questions you may have for our panelists. So I hope you have collected some of these questions. And please, yes. Will you please say your name?
Yeah, sure. My name is Kit Jenkins. I'm Emeritus Professor of International Tourism at the Business School, University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, and currently visiting professor at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. I was very interested in your presentation because in my experience, one of the things that frustrates many development projects has been the lack of identification of cultural sensitivities. And this is a huge problem. I've got 2 questions, if I may. Firstly, given your research on cultural sensitivity, how do you actually then get this back to the people who are creating MOOCs? To publish a report, I would suspect, is not enough. Secondly, Malaysia is a very interesting case because, of course, you could argue there's no Malaysian identity. It's a tree identity. You have the Bumiputra, you have the Chinese, and you have the Indian, which are ethnically, socially, politically very different people. And that's what concerns me, because when you were talking about the top-down approach, this almost runs in the face of development theory, where now most projects are bottom-up. And the last point I wanted to make was that when you were explaining, the government guidelines, where was the cultural sensitivity in those? Could you please tell me? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I guess you asked for both of us, right? Yes. Okay, all right. You want to start?
Sure. Okay, I think my mic is on, so yeah, that's definitely an interesting question. I think indeed the top-down approach that is observable there is also, let's say, helpful. As Carlos was pointing out, it's indeed a kind of a support coming from above to say, okay, this is an interest of ours, and this is how it's perceived, that without this kind of organizational framework, we wouldn't be able to do this. Yet, this doesn't really counter what you have been saying, that what we're talking about in terms of a culture-sensitive pedagogy of MOOCs requires a bottom-up approach as well. So this is just the framework that allows us to do this and kind of welcomes this development. And in fact, I'm repeating myself, I guess, in this sense that I hardly see another. I don't see an alternative to really co-designing this thing. And even if you do have cross-cultural research teams, it is difficult to, let's say, to touch grounds, because understanding of how we design education is can be fundamentally different, and it's hard to find a joint language in the first place. And then to let's say, to not start from scratch, but to, let's say, to define and identify the boundaries in which we define such a MOOC, yeah? Which say, okay, so this is a model that is, let's say, that has emerged in the US and such. How can we make this a productive educational learning arrangement in a very different culture? Is indeed challenging. There is no recipe for that. And even if I have presented these cultural standards, that's just the very first approach, getting an impression of how the educational design could look like. But even from that, you cannot really deduct a clear recipe, oh, this is a Southeast Asian MOOC. So that makes it really difficult. You can just say, you can just anticipate what to expect. That if you'd say, okay, here's a discussion board, here go out and discuss, you might say, oh, look, this is a power-distant culture. You might not expect any contribution there. It's hard in the Western culture. It might be harder or hard for different reasons in yet another culture in the Asian Pacific region. So indeed, that's exactly what we're working on in this project. And I think your questions are really to the point there.
All right. For me personally, I think because those MOOC courses are meant for public universities. Even the guidelines also meant for public universities. So when they design and develop those courses, they still have to follow the guideline, but it's up to them, to the university, and they have the committee member. And as I mentioned just now, these common courses actually, the courses that have to be taken by all students, undergraduate students. So I think this is one way actually to integrate all of us, regardless of our ethnic background. So if we do not have these common courses, then I think there will be concerns later on. And then, but yes, we do not have that study yet to compare between these ethnic groups when it comes to interaction or involvement, participation in MOOC environment. We are yet to do that. I think that's a very good way to research later. All right.
I just want to make a brief comment that learning across a culture doesn't really just not a problem just for online, even for on-campus environment. In fact, we have some foreign students, but even to integrate students on campus is not easy. And one experience I have with the online design of the assignment is that for my course, I simply asked the students to design a football, because the first time when I offered the course was during World Cup. But then the American students start arguing, what is a football, right? So they talk about the culture, the different, the history of the American football. So, but this shows that in the online environment, but in particular in MOOCs, when you have a diverse group of students, actually it really stimulates the learning. Once students, the American students start to talk about American football, then the Indian students talk about the national sport. So it's really interesting and really enjoy that.
Another thing is my personal experience also. In my LMS environment, not in MOOC, I also make sure that each group, forum, discussion forum and whatnot, it has to have different students from different ethnic groups. So that's how we can see their integration, their participation, and they are assigned with whatever task to do together. So that's one way.
Again, my name is Han Jing Q from Hong Kong Poly. Well, I have a question for Professor Pong that I guess a lot of discussion is going on the sustainability of the MOOCs. But in one of your concentrations or program you mentioned earlier, it seems you're doing very well, even have difficulty of distributing the money generated. Would you like to share that part of experience? I'm sure we'll be very interested in knowing why your program is doing so well, when all of us are worrying about the sustainability. Thank you.
Well, when we started the MOOC project, as I mentioned, we never even thought about there could be income, right? I think our specialization was so successful because Coursera actually did some market survey, right? And then they actually provide us with some funding in advance. And then they also have worked with some company. Coursera now has the B2B model. They actually would contact some company who may be interested in the specialization. I think bulk of the income actually generated from this B2B model. But I want to mention that this actually has some impact on the faculty's interest in MOOC. You know, if you look at the MOOCs that we offer so far, none of them are from the School of Business, because they actually felt that the MOOC could dilute, cannibalize their face-to-face on-campus program. But because of this success of the specialization, which actually generated multi-million US dollar. Okay, so the School of Business faculty now become interested. Okay, in the last round of call proposal, most of the proposal actually came from the School of Business. So I think this is something that we didn't anticipate from the beginning. Yeah, because our objective is really to use MOOC as a catalyst to help the development of the teaching and learning program on campus. Because we, as a research-intensive university, we feel that we focus too much on research. But then I think that's our strategy, because we are young from the beginning. In order to make a name, we need to do well in research. But after 10 years, we feel that we need to shift the focus, because our core mission is still teaching and learning.
Hello, my name is Ksenia Kidimova. I'm from HSC University, Russia. And First of all, let me thank you for 3 very interesting and impressive presentations, and I would like to continue with this cultural diversity topic on the one hand and sustainability on the other. Our university has 50 MOOCs on Coursera recently and 3 specializations, and they are all successful, but we see that we produce MOOC as one product, and it is used to be used worldwide. And I wanted to ask you how you see the future of MOOCs, maybe in connection with the idea of Professor Weinberger about these S-MOOCs. Do you think it's technically and organizationally possible to create some I don't know, some other dimensions of MOOCs for special cultures, or I don't know how to develop MOOCs to make them better for different groups of people, for example, to develop better experience.
I think we have to. We have to think about the model that we're proposing here, and that is because, well, one question would be: there is so much out there. There is Wikipedia. There are already many MOOCs out there. There are libraries. So, if you'd like, you could put as much knowledge in your mind or in your brain as you like. Why doesn't that happen? And MOOCs also have a problem of participation. We all know that. So, what's the problem? Well, we have to understand that education is not just putting knowledge in your mind or information in your brain as you would put furniture into a room, but it fulfills other needs. There is the notion of education being, let's say, conducive to personal development, this idea of Humboldt, Bildung, and then the idea of participating in community and becoming part of the community, being able to discuss and shape discussions in a community. And that really, if you look at the people who are participating in a MOOC, you'll see that some just need the certification and some just need the knowledge, for instance, to program something and such. But then, beyond that, there are also specific motives that are very different from that just want to study, philosophy, for instance, without needing to apply that in any form, but wanting to advance themselves and their personality. And we understand that if we're at the university, at a face-to-face university, we understand that much more happens than what's happening in the seminar, to enculturate oneself in a community of academics that is happening outside of the seminar room. And now if we're regarding MOOCs as a kind of replacement for that, we might run into problems because that doesn't really serve this purpose of community building if you're just taking the very limited XMOOC model. And this is really a challenge for the future, to build communities. I mean, the Malaysian approach here, or there was sort of a MOOC, right, for the single mothers already in Malaysia, and it did wonders. But for not because it was an XMOOC, but it created a community and it empowered the people. The reason I went into this field of research 20 years ago, really, I just heard this Carlos saying, I didn't believe time flies. Anyway, so at that time I was doing an online course, and what fascinated me was it granted access to different kinds of people who had real difficulties to come to the university itself in person. And those were people who did a PhD and were working in a company on one hand, and it was single mothers as well. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting, and that's powerful. And to be able to, let's say, to advance communities online is a very interesting perspective, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to add a very short comment. I think my way to look at MOOC in the future is that it will be like an e-book, right? So as instructor, we use others' textbook when we teach. But now with the development of MOOC, you'll see that some instructors would use others' MOOC as the ebook when they conduct, for example, flipped classroom. Right? You ask your own students to watch the MOOC, and then when they come, the instructor would not have to repeat the lecture, but then in a way, it's used that as a book.
I'm Rosanna De Rosa from University of Naples, and I was the EMA project coordinator. During this project, we had the possibility to develop a platform aiming at accommodate cultural diversity. So we start from another point of view, which was how to accommodate a technological artifact to meet the cultural diversity needs, which means languages, diversity in pedagogy, diversity in personalization. And your data, your information are very much aligned with my information coming from different tools, from learning analytics to survey MOOCs. And tomorrow we will present some data about my experience and also about the kind of new model that we had the possibility to study very much, because it was about what I called the strange case of Niche MOOC, which was a MOOC on coding, very successful in Italy, and the demographic of people following this MOOC was women, low technological skills, strong social recognition, very strong motivation for improve their professional competencies. And the model was completely new, from XMOOCs or CMOOCs, something different. But it was working very, very, very well. And this, your data about cultural differences explain also our findings in why pedagogy is not a determinant. Is pedagogy not a determinant, as well length is not a determinant, and also we can share this information tomorrow and the day after in a workshop about cultural diversity. This is very interesting because it reinforces, I think, the need for social research, not just educational research, but the need to come back to social research with relevant questions, which is very interesting to me. Thank you.
Just a brief comment to that. I think in terms of learning objectives, we're talking about at least three. One is content of the MOOC itself. The other one is technology. For many of the people we're dealing with, it's the technology that is a hurdle, and then they learn this technology, and that is empowering, as you said. And the third is, I would say, community building, yeah? That this is a possibility that you are perceiving yourself as not isolated, but as part of an online community. That's, I think, is a powerful idea as well.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point. When I mentioned about a typical book, which is statics, when you look at a MOOC, which could be very dynamic, and learner can actually contribute to new knowledge into this dynamic ebook. Let me use an example. When I taught my Java course, in explaining a concept, I use an example. Say when I drive a car, when I step on the brake, I will try to slow the car down. Then I receive some feedback saying that, well, some students didn't understand. Then I use another example. When I go into a lift or escalator, you want to push a button to go to a certain floor, but you don't need to know, say, the mechanics and the electronics behind it. I thought that's a good example, but I forgot that there are students in a developing country who have never gone into an elevator. There are small kids who have never driven a car. So when we try to explain complicated issues, we want to use examples that are familiar to us without thinking that there's a diverse group of learners out there. So I just posed the question, why don't you, as learner, give more example? One student gave an example that when they do Google search, they know what they're supposed to get is the what, but how the Google search was done, you didn't need to know. Once the student posted a particular example, he get the response, oh, that's a very good example, and now I understand what is abstraction and so on. So you can see that from this diverse group of learners, they are actually contributing to the creation of knowledge. And this could be incorporated in a MOOC. That's why I'm saying that a MOOC could be dynamic, the community could co-design, co-contributing the knowledge into this knowledge base.
So, any other questions? Yep. Yeah, sure.
Hi, I'm Noraida Andop from Universiti Sains, Malaysia. I'm actually in gender studies rather than in studies related to ICTs. I'm part of the project, the competency project. I just would like to respond to the issue brought up by our learned professor from, visiting professor from Hong Kong about the top-down approach in the Malaysian case. I think, yes, the top-down approach has a lot of issues, especially in terms of creativity of the MOOC, because the monitoring and evaluation is very specific in terms of content, in terms of method, and so on. But I think at this initial stage, especially for studies like ourselves, I mean studies like gender studies, for example, in Malaysia, within the cultural context of Malaysian education, it is an opportunity that we can capitalize on to actually equalize education. I think, because I mean this is how we have approached it now. Basically, we have gone on the for gender studies in US, and we have gone on the bandwagon of MOOCs because we feel that we need to appropriate this whereas gender studies have been marginalized in the mainstream education context. We want to appropriate MOOC in order to equalize access to knowledge on gender studies. And because within the context of the education policy also is this whole idea about internationalization. The fact that gender studies is probably more acceptable in a different cultural context. So the engagement between international students and the local students give a lot of value to the education itself, to the gender studies education itself. And I think this is why then we have not got we have not got a MOOC on single mothers yet. We only have got a MOOC on gender studies in the ASEAN context. So that's also a very strategic and a very planned kind of context for introducing that kind of MOOC, because we're always struggling between the idea that gender studies are always adopting Western context of gender studies. So by introducing gender studies in a cultural context, certain cultural context, it sort of gives us legitimacy, so-called, to have an education on gender studies. But at the same time, we're able to attract perhaps more international audience. For the single mothers, also for us, it allows single mothers. It allows for the moderation of patriarchal challenges for single mothers, because single mothers in Malaysia have very specific cultural challenges. They are mostly in poverty. They have problems after their divorce or after their husbands die. They have problems in having a sustainable livelihood because of a lot of social cultural context about not being able to interact, to basically not being able to do certain things at certain time and so on. So skills building for them, for example, may be difficult if you go through the traditional channel. So MOOCs allow this context, allow them to sort of circumvent some patriarchal challenges. So I would like to see MOOCs in this kind of cultural context as an equalizer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any final reaction? Any final comment? No? So I think it's time to close this very interesting panel. Thank you very much, everyone, for having come, for having stayed so late. And I would like to have a big round of applause for our panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you.